So obviously I should have sent Jackie a shorter bio. I apologize for that. I also wanted to say, Judge, I have a 10-year-old daughter. It's all about that bass. I love it. I sing it myself. It is really an honor to be here. I'm looking around at so many people and organizations I know from Atlanta who do so much for so many who have so little. And I have to say, I've been thanked a number of times for agreeing to come, but it really is an honor. It's a privilege to be here, so I thank you. I also have to thank the Atlanta Bar Association because I flew in this morning from Detroit. I leave tomorrow for Maryland. And if it weren't for you, Jackie, I probably wouldn't get to have lunch with my wife. So thank you for that. And so let me say this. The Barstow Award is sort of colloquially called the Genius Award. When I thought, I sort of thought to myself, I spent a life doing things that I consider ingenious. But what the award was for isn't really ingenious at all. It really is something quite obvious. Because what we do is we find lawyers who are doing really, really important and really, really hard work, and we give them training, and we give them support, and we give them strategies to push back against systems that have lost sight of what justice means for poor people. That doesn't strike me as genius. It strikes me as something just human and natural, and something that everyone in this room understands. So, I learned a lesson probably later in life, but I will say, I do want to mention Billy, the executive director of Gideon's Monks, and the staff, some of whom are here right now. But Illy is really someone as a co-founder who reminds me every day of why we do this work. Illy's not a lawyer. She was an educator. But the reason why she got into this work is because she was born into a family where every man in her family has ended up in prison. Her father went to prison when she was 5 years old. She raised her younger brother who's now in prison. And she decided early on that those lawyers assigned to represent the men in her family didn't do what her family members deserved. And she was turned off to public defenders, and she was turned off to the law. So she went into teaching because she thought what she could do was to nip the problem in the bud, break the cycle early. And when I met her, she wasn't too thrilled about the fact that I was a public defender. And then in 2007, I was given the Soros Fellowship to start Gideon's Promise, and I asked her to take the year off and help me build it. And she agreed, and we started building it actually first in our living room, and then actually in a small office at the Southern Center for Human Rights. And almost 8 years later, she's never gone back to teaching. She is the executive director. But what she reminds me every day is someone who's not a lawyer, but who does this because of the people and the families who are impacted, is that we do this work not because of status, because of awards. We do it because of people who don't have access to justice. Illy learned that at 5. It took me until I was 25. I graduated from law school. I became a public defender. And I didn't understand even then that being a public defender was about people. I understood that when I started representing people. I represented Ronnie. Ronnie was born to a mother who was elderly and ill-equipped to raise him. He was illiterate. He ended up homeless on the streets with a bad drug addiction. And to feed his habit, he would break into cars and empty houses. And he was arrested and charged with burglary, and he was given 10 years. The problem was Ronnie had HIV, actually AIDS, full-blown AIDS. And he was locked up, and after about a couple of years in prison, we learned that he had about 6 months to live. So I filed a motion with the judge saying, could Ronnie please go home and die with his mother? And the judge declined that motion, and Ronnie died in a cold cell all alone. I call him Big Ronnie, although he was small in stature, because I also learned a lesson from Little Ronnie. Little Ronnie was 17 when I met him, but he grew up with a drug-addicted mother in an abusive household, and he was taken from his family at the age of 12 and sent to a home in New Hampshire for children who he had severe mental health issues, and he was sent to a home to deal with children, and when he was 15, he was sent back to Washington, D.C. with a treatment plan. He was put in a group home where they very promptly ignored everything that plan recommended: the medication, the treatment, the counseling. And within a year, Ronnie was hanging out with some more dangerous young people, using drugs, and he wound up homeless. And to support himself, he would walk up to people in DuPont Circle, which is sort of this well-to-do part of Washington, D.C., and he put his hand in his pocket like this and say, "Give me your change." And some people laughed him off because he looked a little bit ridiculous, and other people were scared and gave him change. And Ronnie was charged with armed robbery. And I pled to have Ronnie put back on home to get treatment, but he was sent to the D.C. jail, which is a terrifying place, and he begged to be put in solitary confinement. And this 17-year-old boy who looked strong on the outside, but he was 8 years old mentally, was put in solitary confinement. And I remember coming to visit him, and I said, "Ronnie, how you doing?" He said, "Mr. Rapp, I'm great." And I said, "Great, what do you mean? You're in solitary confinement?" He said, "No, I'm great. There's a small courtyard. It's a cement courtyard. And I get an hour a day all to myself. No one else gets it. It's just me." And he was so limited that to him, that was actually something that he should be happy about. And I met Kim. Kim was one of 13 children. Her mother was ill-equipped to raise any of them. As you predict, she became a mother at a young age. And when she was 16 with 2 children, she was sent home after her second birth, childbirth, with food for the child. And she didn't know how to mix it right, and she didn't feed the child properly. And one morning she woke up and the child was blue in her crib, and she called 911, panicked, and they rushed the child to the hospital, and the child died. And Kim was charged with felony murder, the felony deal of being child abuse. And I met this young woman who was so limited and so distraught with losing her daughter. And I learned about the stories of Ronnie and Kim. And that's when I understood his work is about people. It's about people. And 51 years ago, the Supreme Court, in the case called Gideon versus Wainwright, said those people can't have access to justice without lawyers. Now, Gideon only created a right to counsel in criminal cases, but as those of you in the room know all too well, it is equally as important that poor people facing civil problems have lawyers, because it's equally as difficult to maneuver systems when you have problems with housing, or special education, or mental health, or health care. And so I do want to say what an honor it is to be in a room with all of you, because you are people who get that. You volunteer your time to help people at their lowest moment when they have great needs, and we know that without you they can't possibly access justice. Now, I teach law school. I'm on leave right now, and I teach at John Marshall, and I'm really happy to have my colleagues from John Marshall here. And I do orientation usually for new lawyers. I share with them a quote by an unnamed law student. The quote says, "The first thing I lost in law school was the reason why I came." Right? And I tell them, in the first year of law school, you are going to be taught doctrine and rules. You're going to be taught that the law can be reduced to white pages with black letters, and you will forget that there are people behind those pages. You can lose sight of the humanity of the law. We teach that the law is rational. There's no place for feeling quite often. And I would say John Marshall is a place where my colleagues are among the best I've ever met at preparing people to have a social conscience and to have the skills to practice law. But we learn from law school that follows a model that often drives students away from public interest. It causes them to lose their passion for public interest. Well, I also talk to a lot of young lawyers, and I often will say to them, it's not just law school. The quote could just as easily say the first thing you lose to this profession is the reason why you came. And now I'm talking to a group of people for whom that's not true. But you're a small population of the legal community in Atlanta and in the state of Georgia. I talk to a lot of our young graduates. I talked to one recently who's doing divorce law work. And she called me to tell me she was thinking of quitting and finding another profession. And I asked why, and she said, I feel like there's so much pressure to bill hours. And the other day I had this client come in for a consultation, and he had no money, he had $1,000, and he talked to me, and I told him, if you give me $1,000, that's going to get you 4 hours of my time. It's not even worth spending that money. I can't do enough in 4 hours. You're going to need at least $5,000 for this case. And so she advised him not to spend $1,000. And later when she talked to the partner in the firm, the partner scolded her explaining that she should have taken the $1,000, and after that was used, she could have talked to the client about maybe how to mortgage the home or something else. And there's so much pressure in our profession to bill hours that we forget that it's about people. So, again, I think the people in this room are so inspirational because you're the ones in your law firms, you're the ones in nonprofits across the city reminding us about the people. So thank you. Thank you for having me here to speak to you. Thank you for the work you do. I do want to say, as I was looking over the awards and the people that would be here, I know that usually volunteer work in the legal community in Atlanta is disproportionately on the civil side, and I suspect that's for a couple of reasons. One is I think most of the firms, the lawyers have expertise in civil law, and I think the other reason is that as lawyers we know that Gideon created a right to counsel, and we assume that's something that the state is taking care of, that there's not the same need. And what I want to say to this group is there is a desperate need in the criminal arena as well. When I came to Georgia and started the honors program, one of our first lawyers came in so enthusiastic. She came down from Cornell Law School and went to a pretty challenging office. And within 3 years, she decided she had to quit. She wrote an op-ed piece that was actually in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution describing how in the last 13 months she closed 900 cases. She had no funds for investigators or for experts. She calculated that if she took no vacation and worked 50 hours a week, she could give each client 3 hours. And that was under the new state system here in Georgia. I noticed still this morning there's a posting for a circuit public defender position in Fort Hill, Georgia. And one of the job expectations or qualifications is that you should be able to run an office with 3 lawyers and 1,700 cases a year. Nearly 500 cases a year. But rather than seeing that as a crisis that we have to tackle, it's a job qualification, along with sort of able to write well and communicate with people. Right? We've lost sight of justice. And so, what I want to sort of say to you is, kudos for doing the pro bono work you do. But I also will say this, it's not enough. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to transform this justice system, it is going to be the lawyers who do this work every single day, representing all of the people that you all can't touch, that have to be able to make a difference. And I think as a legal community, we have an obligation to figure out how to fill that larger gap when our counties and our states are falling short. You all do more than you can do, but you're all at law firms, and there are resources. And as they say, for those to whom much is given, much is expected in return. And I think we can mobilize law firms to help fill a broader gap, solve a larger problem, not just giving hours that you all can donate, but helping get resources to lawyers in legal aid and public defender offices, lawyers who are doing this so they have the resources, so they have the training, so they have the support, so they have the staff, so they don't have to handle 500 cases a year. I want to share one quick story with you. For those of you who were at our Joining for Justice Awards dinner a couple weeks ago, I apologize because I shared this at that dinner. But I think about the lawyers who do this work every day and how beaten down they get. And I understand why they quit. And I was telling a group a couple weeks ago that the most common call I get from the young lawyers that we train and we send out to really challenging public defender offices is a call from a young lawyer, and they'll say, "Rap," and everyone calls me Rap, and you all should call me Rap. They say, "Rap, I think I'm going to quit. I feel defeated. I can't do this anymore. I've got 300 cases, and I now understand from your program what every person deserves, and I can't do it." And I share with them a story from a book I read not long ago, and appropriately it's a book called Freedom Summer. And this is the 50th anniversary of that amazing summer project in Mississippi. Back in 1964, where young people from all over the country descended on Mississippi to try to change the world, to register people to vote, to build freedom schools, to help people read so they can pass literacy tests,
young people from across the country joining civil rights activists in Mississippi. And they went down there thinking they could change the world, and Bruce Watson writes their story through interviews with them 40 years later, and they talk about how their families told them they were crazy. They couldn't make a difference, and they started knocking on doors, and people said, "Get away from me, the church down the street is bombed, I can't be seen talking to you." And after a while, they started becoming discouraged, and you saw that their hope turned into despair. And they all wondered, was my family right? Can I not make a difference? Well, Bruce Watson fast forwards 40 years to an interview with Congressman John Lewis. And John Lewis said, "You know, if it weren't for Freedom Summer, Barack Obama wouldn't be in the White House." Quite literally, what he was saying was, change can be so incremental that people involved in it don't even always realize they're doing it. And I tell that to our young lawyers, and I urge you to tell this to the lawyers who you work with, who are in the toughest courtrooms representing the most vulnerable people under the most difficult circumstances. What I say to them is, when you go into a courtroom and you stand up and there's an expectation that we will just move cases, we have to get through. Stand up and say, "I'm not processing today, Judge," and you might not get the tangible result that you wanted. But every time you do that, you start to raise expectations about what poor people deserve. And when your colleagues are doing it in the next courtroom over, and others in the next county over, and others in the next state over, collectively we start to change a society that has come to accept a low standard of justice for poor people. The noblest calling of our profession is to speak for those who have no one to speak for them. Again, the people in this room do that. You get that. But we need to help spread that word more broadly, because as a profession, we can solve this justice gap that everyone is talking about. So I'm going to end with one quote. And it's a quote that a public interest lawyer friend of mine told me once. And the quote is, "Every day you write your epitaph." I love that quote, right? Because it really sums up why we do this work at our best. Every day we are leaving a legacy. We're creating a better world. That's what I try to tell my students and young lawyers. So I want to end where I started and say this. Jackie, thank you for inviting me. I can't tell you what an honor it is to be asked to spend lunch with a group of people who are writing amazing epitaphs. And again, I applaud you and challenge you to spread the word farther so we can get your offices, your firms, your organizations, the other lawyers you know, helping us write that epitaph that will give us the legal profession we all want to brag about 40 years down the road. Thank you so much. Congratulations to all of you.